Welcome, everybody, to this amazing session. And thank you so much, Eric, for being here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me at RevCon. I hope everybody's having a good show so far. We are into the home stretch for the content, and what I'm going to share with you today. The original title is Webinars as a Pipeline Accelerator, and the focus of that was to talk about what can you do to make webinars have a bigger impact on your pipeline, on revenue, bigger business impact. But I thought about the title again, and I decided to kind of update it or subtitle it as a playbook for better webinars, because I know that everybody's looking, you come to these things for some takeaways. If you could get 5 takeaways in an hour, then, or in a half an hour, then I think everybody feels like, it was time well spent. Don't necessarily need 100 takeaways. I just need 5 for something to try with my team in the next week or two.
Absolutely. This is such an important topic. And I'm sure a lot of us here listening in today are hosting a lot of webinars, and there's always so much more to learn. So, this, yes, is going to be fantastic. I'm going to leave you to it, Eric, and see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Pragya. So, as you heard, I'm Erik Newton. I'm the CMO at Hubilo. And prior to Hubilo, I was the VP of marketing at Milestone and at BrightEdge and at mp3.com and at Netflix and a couple other companies. So I've done B2C and B2B. In the B2B realm, I definitely do a lot more webinars. It's a bigger part. I think in B2C, sometimes you could do community, or you might be doing advertising or videos themselves. But webinars, this long format kind of educational infotainment medium that we use that's more popular in B2B, particularly in SaaS. So what we do at Hubilo is we help you 2x your pipeline with better webinars. We launched something called the Snackable Content Hub, which automates with Gen AI the repurposing of the content. If you've ever done a webinar, you know that that's often the long tent pole that we all deal with, is getting that content ready for getting a shorter format content, a 1-minute clip as a trailer. If you follow G2, you can find that we're well regarded by our customer community for usability, satisfaction, support, event ROI, and like 50 other categories. And we were included in the Forrester Wave of event tech platforms. All right, let's start with a poll. And if you guys could please participate in the poll, that would be great. And Pragya, if you could launch the poll for us. And so how good of a handle do you have on your webinar operation? Very good handle, like you've definitely got a plan, you've optimized it, you've got a good checklist. It's good, it's average, or there's room to improve. So if you guys could add those, if you guys could do the poll responses, give you guys a little bit more time. Anybody else want to vote? All right, it looks like, okay, let's go ahead. I'll show the poll on stage. We got a handful of votes here, and what we see is that, the majority of the people in this session are looking for some tips on how to improve, which is great. Thanks for the extra votes. You guys can keep voting. If you click on the polls panel, you can open it and vote as we go along. But it looks like, because webinars are a complicated, operationally complex thing, I think it's the most complex asset and channel. I think it's got about 50 or 60 things on the full checklist. And what I'm going to focus on with you today are these 3 phases: the before phase, the during phase, and the after phase. And the key opportunity for all of us here is to recognize that execution is a competitive advantage. Just like great content is a competitive advantage, being really, really good at how we do some of these campaigns, how we go to market with some of these materials, gives us a competitive advantage to get in front of our customers and get our message out there. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper on each of these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys something very specific. We are going to, we're recording. We're sharing the deck, but I hope you guys feel like taking notes, at least that I'm saying things that you feel like you could try this at home. So in targeting, when you start to think about your webinar calendar, think about who are you going to target. Are you going to target customers or prospects? Are you going to do any industry targeting? Are you going to do any technographic targeting? So technographic means what software are they using now? Are they using Microsoft Outlook? Are they using Gmail? Or, what else can, what other, if you're doing a rip and replace program, you're going to care about the technographics. Then you got to think about the ICP, the ideal customer profile. What's the job title of that person? And, what are their use cases? So that's your targeting. Then you go to list building. And hopefully list building is a thing that happens all the time, every week, that you're improving your list, you're enhancing your records, so that when you go to pull a list, that you do have thousands and thousands of people to pull from. Because my recommendation, or my experience with webinar marketing, is that 75% for B2B will come from your email list. And so you want to make sure you have tens of thousands of people, because about 1% to 2% will register. So if you get 2% of 10,000 people that you've targeted, you're going to get 200 reg. Now, I've also found out that on a prospect list, you're going to get about 25% of the people are going to show up for the event. So you're going to get that kind of compression. So you want to start with a pretty big list so that you have a good audience, so that your efforts are well rewarded. Now, before the webinar, you also think about the format. Are you going to be doing a keynote style, something like what I'm doing here, a single speaker? Are you going to be doing an interview style where you keep the host on stage? The host is feeding questions and giving commentary back and forth. Or are you going to do a panel? Now, we've seen all of those today, but you need to decide that with a lot of advance notice. If you're going to do a panel, it takes a lot longer to get all the speakers lined up and prepared, and have meetings where everybody can get to know each other. So once you know the format, you can think about the content. So typically, you want to have 15 or fewer slides. You want to think about 30 to 45 minutes is typical right now. Try not to go all the way to the edge of the hour on your event. And then once you've got all those wheels turning, you've got to do your email outreach and your social outreach. So you're going to be inviting, and again, think about inviting thousands and tens of thousands of people to make sure that you get hundreds registered. Now, one of the important things to think about logistically is your calendar block. If you don't send people a calendar invite really close to the time when they're registering, so that you get on their calendar, you have a real danger of them forgetting that they signed up, because these are typically, your planning cycle is going to be about 4 weeks. So you kind of plan for 4 weeks, but in my experience, you always fall a little bit behind. So you're usually on a 3-week campaign calendar. And in those 3 weeks, you want to drop 3 to 5 emails to people. You don't want to oversaturate it, and leave 2 emails closer to the close week of the event. Now, it's kind of obvious for anything you're going to do in business, but you should practice. And I recommend practicing out loud. Even better, I recommend recording yourself on your webinar platform or your meeting platform, or even Vidyard or Vimeo, whatever you're using, and just to see how it sounds and to get your pacing right. All right, so if you guys have any questions, you guys can throw them into the Q&A. I'm going to take a question here from Gina. How do webinars compare with live engaging events such as LinkedIn audio events? Well, webinars, the live portion of a webinar is very close to any other live event, because people have the fear of missing out. They have they feel like it's an opportunity to get for them to get in front, or for them to hear directly from a speaker, to have a chance to ask those questions. And it generally works well to say this is happening at a specific point in time. The great thing about webinars and digital events is that they're much more inclusive for people who might not be able to travel to like a live event or an in-person event. All right, drop me any questions and anything else you want into the chat. All right, now during the webinar, I have a couple of recommendations, and one of my recommendations, depending on how experienced you are, this is probably my 60th or 70th webinar, but if you're a little bit nervous, you can come out early. There's no rule that says you have to wait until it's exactly go time. Come out a little bit early, engage the audience, warm up your voice, because you're typically sitting backstage for 10, 15 minutes. Your voice can go cold. So warm yourself up, warm up the audience, and start building up that rapport with the audience, so that they start chatting and they start doing Q&A. one of the tricks I use sometimes, and we didn't do it here today, was I ask people, hey, could you test the Q&A for me? I just want to make sure that it works. And people type in some sample question. And that's a great way for you to get people going and get them off the fence of, I'm going to be passive and I'm going to lurk, or no, Erik's talking to me. I'm going to talk back to him. All right, a couple questions came in. So the most successful webinar format for me, I think, is the two-speaker radio disc jockey. So it's a little more than host and guest. It's kind of like two guests that know each other, and they get a kind of an energy going. And I've had really good feedback when I've done those kinds. So it can be like your CMO and your VP of marketing. It can be, I did one recently with my director of product, or my VP of products. We're going to do another one next week. I love that format. And I think you want to be loose. You don't want to just pound your slides. You know, people do appreciate prepared material on slides, but natural conversation is really good. What metrics do you feel are most valuable to the webinar? Melina, I'm going to come back to that question in just a moment. Success, what metrics for webinars? I've got a lot of stats that I've included here for us, and I'll share them with you towards the end. Let me see what are the best host presenters you admire, you've taken inspiration from. I think for me, Jason, the ones I like best are people who share new information. They share insights. I'm a knowledge worker. I love to hear about experiments people have done. All right, let's go back to the content and using a producer. So you can do a webinar by yourself. It's a little bit of a stretch if you're not used to it. I recommend you have one or two people on your team feeding information to the audience, seeding things into the chats, answering questions for you that they think might not be the right kind of questions for you to do on stage in front of everybody. But those are having them with you is a good approach. Now, doing a poll, I like polls. It's another signal to the audience that we're going to be talking about this together, more GarageBand style than, you know, keynote stage speaker where I'm just going to be talking at you. Now, another thing you can do is giveaways, and you can offer people a $10 gift card. Everybody who asks a question here, I'll do it right now. Everybody who asks a question from this moment at 12 minutes after gets a $10 gift card for Amazon or Starbucks, whichever you like. So I'll do that for the next 5 people that ask a question. You get a giveaway, or you do a nice big drawing for people to sort of incentivize people, get them off the fence and get them involved. Now, CTAs, your webinar is really about building rapport, but it's also about taking the opportunity to convert people. And so you want to get people to come to a demo. So you should have very explicit CTAs towards the end of your content. Download this report. You're going to be sending them the deck, but try to get them into another piece of content. Get them to visit your website. So if you look in the chat, you'll see that, you know, we could be posting information for you just to go, and you can post a video and just tell people open a tab. So CTAs, you can have multiple CTAs for these things. You know, you want to connect with us. Do you want a demo? All those CTAs can work for you. All right, let me check questions. Good ways to identify topics. So when we're thinking about content, good ways to identify topics are ask your salespeople, ask your CS people. Look at what kind of questions are coming in. What kind of problems does your customer community have? Go to forums and see what's troubling people. Solve that problem for people, and you'll have a nice piece of content that you can use to share with them. All right, status. So after the webinar, now hopefully you have done your integration so that you're using your APIs so that your email system is talking to your webinar system and your email system are getting your data into Salesforce automatically. But you also might be doing some batch uploads where you're figuring out what did people do during the webinar, which people registered, which people attended. So do those status updates and do them quickly. Make sure your team is prepared to spend the couple of hours after the webinar closing out all these items, and don't let them stretch over, particularly over the weekend, because as you go over the weekend, people have less and less awareness and memory that you that they did something with you. So do it while it's fresh, but plan to do that and get the data updated and have the hygiene and the QA really tight. So the deck and video, obviously everybody wants to get the deck and video. The response rate, the engagement rate of the open rate of the emails for the deck and the video are usually above 75, 80%. So you have this point of really high engagement with people that they're going to be, that they want to get that content. Make sure the deck's ready. I usually send the final deck about an hour before. I send it out to my team because there's multiple people on the team who are going to use it for the website, for the blog, and you want to make sure they have that final deck and send out the PowerPoint if you've edited it, or the PDF. Now, you want to update a blog. You should always do a blog because people are always looking for a one-page version of the webinar. And that one-page version can be a piece of collateral you make, but it's slightly easier to make a blog. You can start drafting the blog as the speaker, or you can practice your presentation with one of your content creators, and that content creator could build that build that blog for you. And the other thing you want to do is make sure you update on your site. So if there's an upcoming webinar, right after the webinar is finished, that needs to come down, and the on-demand webinar tile needs to be added to your resources section, for example. Now, enablement, you should be doing enablement kind of at the before and not quite during and after, is that you're going to enable your salespeople to invite people, because you want to do a bulk invitation, and you also want to have people do a hand-curated outreach to people. So particularly late stage prospects in the pipe, customers that are coming up for renewal, that you should be getting 10, 15%. I usually don't see a lot of volume coming out of that, but it's a good thing to do. Now, encore presentations, this is something that sort of gets left in the dust, because if you, when you create all this content, it takes a lot of hours to create a deck and to think about what you're going to say and perfect it, get the artwork done. You can do that deck every quarter. You can do that presentation every quarter. Think of the math. My database is about 40,000. And if I get 150, 200 people to come to an event, that's still 39,800 people that haven't seen it. Just exclude the people that have been exposed to the content, and then just do the content again, and it helps you build your schedule. Now you'll be able to get above the frequency of, say, once a month, which starts to be a little bit taxing for the team because they're thinking about that 3-week runway because they're creating content and so forth. Now, another thing you should do with encore presentations is go across the international time zones. You should do this webinar live at a time that's good in the US. You should do it for Europe, and you should do it for Asia if you serve all of those markets. So you've got the speaker, it gets easier and easier. Typically the content gets better when people have done it once, have done it more than once before. Okay. Now, I've added in some stats here that I think you guys might find interesting. I'm going to start a couple of the stats, and then I'll go back and look at the questions. So I mentioned to you that 72, 75% of your B2B registration is going to come from your email list. Typically, the rest is going to come from social and from employee outreach, sometimes from your website if you put a message up on the homepage. So you can expect 1 to 2% registration, maybe 1.5%. And so if you're planning, again, that leads you to how do you do your list building for that. A lot of reg comes in the last week. People are reading your messages, but they're not taking action on it until typically you're getting 30 to 50% in the last week, and a little push on the last 2 days. 25% of your, I'm seeing 25, 22% of prospect registrants are attending, but it would be a lot higher for customers if you're telling them how to get value out of their product. So, I don't necessarily recommend combining those webinars together because it's a little bit confusing for the audience, some of whom have access to the platform, some of whom don't. So good idea to separate those two out as two different events. Now, I point out to people that 7/8 of your opportunity should be on demand. And what I mean by that is if you get 100 people to register and you get 25 people to attend, then you have 75 people who registered but haven't consumed yet. So you should market those people pretty aggressively to say, here it is. And if you don't see them taking action, opening the email and clicking on it, then you should push to have them take that action over and over. Now, there's still, if you get 200 people, there's still 39,000 people in the database who haven't seen this webinar yet. Keep marketing it to them as on demand and target getting 7 times more on demand than you got live. That's just that's a suggestion that I think can help you guys out. Now, you want to invite people 4 or 5 times in 3 weeks. I think that's a good frequency. And I've tested using the speaker name or host. So who should it come from? Does it come from team at Hubilo? Does it come from Erik? So if it's an executive that's part of the community, I think it's a good idea that the message comes directly from them. You can also, if you have a known speaker or somebody from a big company, make sure that that name and company is in the title. Don't be too conceptual with your subject line because you've got this asset that you're sharing with the community, right? The best times for webinars are in the United States are 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday to Thursday. I've seen this question come up for other channels and tactics. And this totally makes sense because a lot of people take off on Friday, and on Monday, they're usually setting up their internal meetings. So most people do that. And then obviously the time bands are when it's not too early for Pacific and it's not after hours for the East. Now, I recommend thinking about an honorarium of $200 to $500 for your speaker. If you're using an external speaker and they're not a paid speaker, then you should give them a substantial gift because it's going to take them a number of hours. And typically, you're going to be asking executive contacts of the company to be your speakers. So executive time is easily worth a couple $100 an hour. So you should be reasonably generous with your gift. Trend your webinar length to under 45 minutes. As I said, it's kind of out of fashion post-COVID, I would say, to go for the longest, 40, 55, 60 minutes, and definitely try not to go over, leave some time for questions. Yeah, and then I gave you that recommendation on core performances. So if you're interested in more detail on this, you can find the Ultimate Webinar Planning Checklist, which is a lot longer, which is like 60, 70 items here on the website. And I think we've added it in the chat. You can take a look there. All right, I'm going to go to Q&A, and I can put, if these are helpful, these stats are helpful for stimulating questions, let me know. All right, we can get our questions. Let's get our questions going in here. And Q&A. So the average success metrics. So as I said, 1 to 2% registration, and then I would hope to engage about 20% of the audience would take some engagement step, a poll, a question, a chat, and those signals and the information that comes from those signals are good. They can be helpful. When I do a conversion prompt and say, would you like a demo? I typically see about 2 or 3% of the audience will say, yeah, I'm ready for a demo. And a lot of good things are happening there because you're a marketing person speaking to marketers. They don't feel the intimidation and the kind of the pressure they might feel with the salespeople. We talked about that. Is it a good idea to use an influencer? So is it a good idea to use an influencer as a guest speaker? It definitely can be. I mean, what you want is a good speaker that is helping solve problems that the audience wants solved. The advantage of using an influencer and a paid influencer is that you probably have an agreement that they'll market to their audience. So if your influencer and they have target ICP in their audience, then having that person involved is going to be beneficial to your registration. You're going to pay a lot for an influencer. I imagine you'll pay between $5,000 and $50,000 for an influencer, depending on how big their community is. But if they bring in 500 people, if they bring in 500 reg, that might work with your business model. What are your suggestions for affordably advertising, getting the word out? Terry, that's a great question. And I've had really good luck lately with LinkedIn boosts. So you make an ad for LinkedIn, the typical kind of thing, like we're having a webinar. You don't get really high engagement from your organic audience, but that's a good one to boost. And what I love about boosting is that I can do the title targeting and the geo targeting outreach to people. And I do get new people coming in. That's where you'll get 10, 15, maybe 20% of people. And I typically spend about $500. So $500, with tight targeting does get you a lot of good impressions. And among things I do with LinkedIn, this is one of the more efficient ones that I've found. How do you get SMEs on board with presenting webinars? Yeah, if your company uses OKRs, go ahead and convince the division leader at CS that they need to put up a speaker or two. Build your calendar out for a year and think about at least 12 webinars. And if once you get a little bit more comfortable and efficient using the checklist, then go to 18 and 20 webinars as you start to segment down more. But you're definitely going to burn out a speaker. You can't ask your CMO to talk that often. You can, but it might not be what the audience wants. So somebody from sales, and you kind of use that top-down approach to get those SMEs to come in and ask. Should your CMO be your webinar speaker? And if yes, how often? So CEOs don't tend to be the speakers in mid-sized to larger companies. So I think it would be a really special announcement. And I think you'd kind of want to treat the CEO like a main stage speaker hosted by somebody like me. So the CMO would be the host, maybe the main speaker, product leader would be there, and the CEO comes out and does the ta-da reveal. That could be strong. But I don't see a lot of CEOs doing blocking and tackling or rolling out their thought leadership that way. The CEOs typically roll out their thought leadership by writing it down and posting. Okay, are there certain industries, company sizes where webinars are more effective than others? Yeah, that's a good question. I like the question. Do I have a data point? The company has to be big enough that people can take a little bit of time out from their day. In a very small company, people are going to be doing like super multitasking, 5-10 functions. They're probably not going to take out this study time. So I would say mid-market all the way to enterprise. And I find that the really large companies that are really well staffed, they do take time for education and training themselves. So I find that you'll end up with a lot of more big companies in a lot of ways. Now, if you're working with a community like RevGenius, they're going to pull in people from all walks of life and all sizes. How does event feedback play into the timeline? So let me see if I understand your question, Dana. Event feedback, I think you might be talking about the interaction we're doing right now is budget for both. So add time for 5, 6, 7 questions, and then add a little bit of extra content, sort of bonus content that you're going to put in there, so that if the questions don't come in, you just keep talking. If the questions do come in, you just drop it off and let the people discover the content on their own. How many employees does a company typically need to run webinars end to end? It's about 3. There's a really strong role for a content person, a marketing ops person, and a speaker. Those are the 3 minimum. But once you generate the leads and the output from this, then you obviously want to hand off to salespeople. All right. And if you guys want to reach me, you can reach me at erik@hubilo.com. And if there's no more questions, back to you, Pragya.
Thank you so much, Erik. That was actually super power-packed, and we had so many questions from the audience. Thank you so much to all of you. And someone just said concise and dense. So that's fantastic. I guess everybody was taking notes.
People use those words to describe my work more often than you probably would believe it at this point.
Once again, thank you so much, Erik. And to everybody else in the audience, we are starting with our next session in a minute. See you there.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.